And we are live. Welcome, mystery and thriller fans, to our very last event of 2021. And we are going out with the proverbial big bang. I'm delighted to welcome the incredible Dr. Karen Odden tonight, here to give us the inside scoop on her red hot, brand new historical thriller, Down a Dark River. Karen, tell us about this book.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And I want to just give major props to you. And I want to tell the audience that I really fell for Sara because she came and helped us out with the Desert Sleuths. We do this writing conference that we do every year, and she was an amazing panel moderator. So that's when I first met Sara. So I'm just giving you props.
Karen, thank you so much. How lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, it was, you're just warm and genuine. And I mean, we got comments after that conference about how nice you were. So I'm just saying.
Oh my God, hashtag day made, year made. This is the best thing ever. Thank you so much for telling me.
So, okay, so about this book, Down a Dark River. I had published 3 books about young women protagonists in 1870s London. This is my happy spot because this is where I wrote my dissertation on Victorian railways and 1850s to 1890s. So 1870s is really where I live. And I guess it was maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I kind of was in the middle of the second one, and I read this story. It was I think it was in the New Yorker, not positive. I tossed the magazine after I read it, but it was a story about race and the law in the United States. And inside this article was a sort of a vignette, a little mini story about a young Black woman who had been jaywalking across a quiet street in Alabama. And a car came around the corner and hit her. It was a fancy car. I think it was like a Lexus or something. And it was a white man. And he was under the influence, but he wasn't technically drunk. Had a couple drinks in him, maybe buzzed. And he hit her. She ended up in the hospital for months with terrible injuries. And when the family sued, the judge awarded her $2,000. Yeah, I know.
$2,000
Yes.
for being hit by a drunk driver, and which rendered her so injured and that she had to be in the hospital for months. Oh my God, yes. I'm horrified.
Yeah, I mean, and that's sort of chilling enough already.
Yeah.
But what interested me, Sara, was that the father, the girl's father, who was rightfully indignant and angry, he went after the judge's daughter. He threatened her. Not the judge, but the daughter. And this I don't know, this really caught me because I started thinking about revenge, right? I mean, because, I guess we kind of think of revenge as, an eye for an eye. That's sort of the typical phrase. And that feels very sort of simple. It's a, quick little phrase. It's as if revenge is simple. I don't think revenge is simple at all. And I think in this case, revenge was this man's sort of last ditch effort to demand recognition and empathy. And in a sense, connection. Brené Brown always says that our deepest desires for connection. And I think, if one aspect of being connected is having our experience recognized and acknowledged by somebody else, that's what this man was trying to do. He was trying to get the judge to understand this is what it is like to almost lose a child. Yeah. And so this contemporary story in Alabama grabbed me, held on to me through Dangerous Duet, through Trace of Deceit. And when I finally got around to writing my next book, I thought, okay, I need to write this book. But because it is largely about judges and lawyers and, I had to, and if I wanted to set it in Victorian England, I had to have a male protagonist because there were no women policemen, there were no women lawyers, no women judges, obviously in 1870s London. So that's how I ended up with the male protagonist. And I took the story and put it into 1870s England.
Oh my God, Karen, I am fascinated. So I am a major historical crime fan. I am a major history buff. I minored in European history. I love historical. So I am here for it. I know so many of us are. So I just want to take a moment and welcome everybody. If you're watching for Murder by the Books channels, my channels, our private Facebook group for mystery and thriller fans, YouTube, Facebook, wherever you're watching from, you are in the right place. This is the right time. And we're about to get down into it. So if you have a question for Dr. Karen, just get it going in the comments. This is your time. If you've been here before, you know how it works. You know this is your time. And if you're new, here's how it works. This is your time. So ask Karen about her PhD in English. Ask her about her research process. Ask her about this book. Ask her about writing a man, right, versus her previous books, which had female protagonists. I got a lot of questions. I know you do too. So get them going in the comments. Welcome, Jerry. Welcome, Shirley. Welcome, Judy. Welcome, Jane. Welcome, Rebecca, Nancy, Alan, Stephanie, Keith. Welcome, everybody. So great to see you. And if I missed you, I'll get you later. Let us know what your questions are. Maria says, "Dear Dr. Karen." I love that. This is the Dr. Karen show. Dear Dr.
Like
Karen.
Dr. Ruth.
Exactly. Dr. Ruth was the 1980s. Dr. Karen is the 2020s. Maria, great question. I was wondering this too. Dear Dr. Karen, was it hard to put yourself in a man's mind? I'm wondering too. What was that like?
It was at first. And I kept feeling like I was writing a man the way a woman would imagine writing a man, as opposed to writing a man. Do you know what I mean? I was trying to really get in there. And so one of the things I did was, I know it's sort of cheating. I went back and I started reading books like The Born Identity out loud. I started finding books with male protagonists and reading them out loud, because I feel like that trains my ear in it's much more effective. So I felt like, okay, I'm sort of getting that masculine vibe, the cadence, as it were. And I also had the advantage of being able to read a bunch of police procedurals that were written in the 1870s and were written by men about policing and that kind of thing. And so that gives you an idea how they would talk about their day and how they would talk about criminals or their process or whatever. So that helped a lot too. I could kind of crib some of those newspaper reports and, parliamentary reports and, that kind of thing. Yeah.
So, Dr. Karen, I noticed that your protagonist he's a badass, bare knuckles boxer turned detective. So he's scrappy. He is very Jason Bourne. So while you were reading these 1870s police procedurals, which by the way, I'm amazed that you found, I didn't even know they existed. Did you read them aloud in a British accent? How did it go for you?
I wish I could. I have a terrible British accent. It's really, really bad, so I don't even do it.
But an Irish accent, because your guy's Irish.
Yes,
so he is Irish. In an Irish brogue? I mean, what was that like?
I did not, but I have to tell you, one of the interesting things was when Dreamscape purchased the rights from Crooked Lane to do the audiobook. I think we went through 9 different narrators trying to find just the right one, because the very, very first group of 3 that they sent to me, I loved the voices, but they all sounded like they belonged on Debbie. They were, and some of them were a little bit too like.
Karen, we lost you there for one quick second. Can you just say that one part again?
Oops, I think I just lost you. And I was like, oh, these aren't really quite right for Michael Corravan. I mean, they sound nice to listen to, but they aren't him. Sorry?
No. We can hear you. You're back. You're good. You're
okay,
good.
I'm back. Okay, good. Okay. And so
oh no, we lost her. Okay, she'll be right back. It's okay. This is the time. Oh, she's back. Okay, perfect. So Karen,
sorry.
That's okay. This is what it is in the pandemic. Okay, so you listened to 9 different actors audition. And none of them were your Corravan.
Not quite, until we got to the last couple. And so the first 3 were too old. They sounded like Downton Abbey, and they were too posh. They were way too posh, and they were also older, like 50s. Then the next batch, I sent it out to 3 friends in my book club who all do audiobooks, because I don't do audiobooks. I like my paper, you know, I'm a paper girl. And I send it to them and they're like, oh, we all like number 2, but number 2 turned out not to be available. And I was like, Rrr. So then they sent 2 more and I was playing them out loud. And my daughter, Julia, who is my first reader and really my best critic, she really is my first beta reader. And she's read Down a Duck River about 7 times. And she looked up she kind of came in from the kitchen. She was like, oh, that's Corravan. And I, you know, and it was the guy's name is Joshua Manning, and he's got a wonderful voice. He's actually Scottish, but the accent sounds just right. He's the right age. He even looks like Corravan. If you take a look at my newsletter, he's pretty hot.
He is a tasty treat. I mean, that guy looks like a male model / actor.
Yeah.
So that is when I saw that you said this, that in your mind, this is how he looked. Because I got that, I saw that the picture of him before I read it. So then I read it picturing him, and let me tell you, it really enhanced my reading experience.
Yeah, it does.
Did you agree when your daughter said, there he is? Were you like, oh yes, there he is? Or were you like, no, I'm still thinking about number 2?
Yeah, no, she was spot on.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, like I was listening to him, I'm like, I think this is right. This feels right to me. So yeah.
Did she give you any feedback where you were like, no, Julie, that's not right?
What you mean when she was reviewing my book?
She was reading the draft 7 times.
You know, not really. She I mean, she might say to me something like, this doesn't feel right. Like maybe he would do this instead. And I'll say, well, why did you think that? And we kind of talk through it. It's almost like a therapy session, you know, between the patient and the therapist, kind of going back and forth, like trying to figure out, okay, what did you mean by this? And what did you mean by that? And what did you mean? Oh, this is what you meant. Okay, well, maybe you want to do it this way instead, kind of. And you get to the point where they match up, you know?
Is she an English literature major?
No, she's a very avid reader, but she's actually a computer science major at Northwestern. Yeah.
Wow, computer science, but yet can read. Her mom, an English PhD wielding published author, and provide feedback that is of value to you. I love that, Karen.
Yeah,
I love that.
It's a nice mother-daughter activity.
Yes. How old is she? I'm just wondering, is she available for hire?
She's 21. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Okay, so let's talk about your process. So your daughter's reading it. She read it 7 times. Then you're passing it to anyone else? Are you passing it to your beta group? Do you have a beta group? Take us through the process, soup to nuts.
So yeah, the first draft is always just sort of a mess. And you know, and just so you know, I kind of like started this book and then put it aside to finish writing Trace of Deceit, and then picked it back up again, and then wrote another book about a young woman in London, 1870s again, whose best friend goes to Africa and returns home with a story about slaves and ivory. I mean, I've got all these other projects going, but this one kind of kept just being there. And so I think my agent Josh, he took Down a Duck River out early, and nobody wanted it. And I kind of set it aside and thought, okay, let me come back to it. So I did a bunch of revision on it, and I had a lot of people read it. I had probably, I don't know, 12 or 15 readers, and they catch all kinds of things. Like some readers will catch things like, you know, like the small stuff, like, this is inconsistent with what you said before. Some of them will catch things like, there's not enough psychological motivation here. I don't believe he would actually do this based on what you've given me so far. Other people, one of them was, he's a professor, he's of Victorian literature, and I sent it to him, and he kept me from making a serious howler. I don't know if you remember, but there's oh my God, it was so, it's silly, but so there's a scene in the book where one of the things that haunts Corravan, Inspector Corravan, is this old case about this man, and it's based on Jack the Ripper, who was actually committed his murders in 1880s Whitechapel. And just for context, I mean, Whitechapel is not, you know, it's not a good section of town. This is where Corravan grows up in the 1870s, kind of before Jack the Ripper is around. But this old case is a man who was killing music hall girls and then raking them with his fingernails and really, sort of destroying their appearance. And he's haunted by this case. And because the newspapers got hold of certain details and they thought he was French, and they thought that the raking of the fingernails was kind of like a wolf, they called him le loup, which is wolf in French. Well, in my first draft, I accidentally put le lapin, which is the bunny. And this,
so
and
not
this
quite as terrifying.
Not quite as terrifying. And so this professor wrote to me so nicely, so politely, saying, "I think you mean le lapin instead of le loup." I don't think you mean le lapin. I was like, yeah. Anyway, so like people catch stuff like that, but I have other writers. I mean, some really amazing women I know who are writers as well. Mariah Fredericks. Jess Montgomery, Susie Calkins read a very, very early draft of the first 30 pages of this. And they had a great suggestion, which was, Karen, you got to cut the prologue. And she was right, and I did. My friend Julianne Douglas, she's another really great reader for me. So I have a nice community of practice. It's not an official readers group, but I just have a lot of people who I pass it to, and I get different kinds of feedback from everybody. It's a great process.
Now, Karen, how long did it take you to write this book, have your daughter read it 7 times, and then have your 12 to 15 readers also read it? How long, and you plus the time you first read the case and you started thinking about it, how long of a process was this?
It's probably about 6 years. I mean, it took, like I said, it wasn't 6 years, I mean, I was doing other things too, but yeah, it takes, and I'm a slow writer. Like it takes me, things need to percolate a long time for me to feel like the characters feel real.
Yes.
Real enough that when I put, for example, Corravan and his love interest Belinda in a room together, they just talk to each other and I just write it down. Do you know what I mean? Like I know them well enough that they're talking, moving, that kind of, and walking around each other or whatever it is that they're doing, sipping tea. And I kind of see it like a movie, and I can write it down. So, but it takes me a long time to know Belinda well enough. I write a backstory for her. It took me a long time to get to know Styles, Inspector Corravan's sidekick. It took me a long time to know Vincent, even though he's a real person. He actually was the director for Scotland Yard after that whole scandal happened, and then they had to do make a clean sweep out of the yard of all those corrupt inspectors. So he's a real person, but it still took me a while to get to know him.
Wow. So first of all, I just want to validate and give a shout out to taking the time to let the book marinate, taking the time to let it season and gestate and ripen to produce a more complex, deep, multi-tonal, multifaceted work. So I think there's so much pressure in the industry and frankly, just in life to be fast. Everything has to be faster, better. We can't have 4G anymore. We need 5G. Like everything has to be, so freaking fast. I've been working on my next book for 7.5 years, and it kind of makes me feel like a loser sometimes when I see other people, putting work out so fast. And hats off to them. Like, teach me your ways. I genuflect to you. That's amazing. But I will say that when someone has taken the time, I just hosted Wanda Morris. Her book took 13 years. I can feel when a book, as a reader, I can feel when someone has taken that time to let it marinate, to let it gestate, to let it ripen. I feel that. Readers, let me know in the comments if you feel that too. And does it matter to you? Let me know. I can tell you that the critics certainly notice, because my goodness, Dr. Odden, we have some fabulous praise. Let's kick off with the mother of all reviewers, Kirkus, which I believe the New York Times called notoriously curmudgeonly, reliably curmudgeonly. And they gave you a rave saying it is a harrowing tale of unbridled vice that exposes the dark underbelly of Victorian society. Wow, I loved that review. So let's talk about how you do that from a craft perspective. Now, clearly, you know what you're doing because you've written other books. You have a PhD, hence Dr. Karen. But let's talk about how you craft a harrowing tale. How do you raise the stakes when you're sitting there typing to make it feel harrowing to us as a reader? What's the secret?
Oh gosh, that's a really good question. I don't have a pat answer, but I have a couple things that I know.
Tell me what you know.
With this, so with that original story, I really tried to spend a lot of time tapping into the criminal's mind. Because the villain of my tale, and I don't want to do any spoilers here, he's an angry father. And I actually spent some time thinking about times when I wanted to take revenge.
Ooh.
I'm not going to tell you any of those times. but there, I mean, we all have those moments where we've been so hurt or so profoundly betrayed or disappointed, or where something just doesn't feel fair. And yeah, I think part of my process is trying to sit there, not shove it aside like, oh, that's very uncomfortable to think about, but to really sit there and say, okay, that feels ugly and messy. One of my favorite lines of poetry is Yeats's Circus Animals Desertion. And at the very end, he talks about he has to put, he has to go down where all the ladders start, in the rag and bone shop of the heart. And it's this, it's like this idea, the rag and bone shops in Victorian England were sort of like the lowest of the low pawn shops, I guess you'd call them. And they're filled with just stuff. I mean, nothing pretty, but I do think that sitting with those things sitting with those feelings is a good place to start. And one of my friends and a really wonderful author, Diane Friedman, once said in one of her seminars, and it's something that I always remember: a villain is never a villain in his own head.
Ooh.
If the villain were to if a villain were to write his story, he's not saying, oh, I'm a villain, I'm a bad guy. He's saying, no, I've got justification for the way I'm behaving. There's a reason I'm doing this. I come by my anger honestly. And so I spend a lot of time writing that backstory of the criminal, of the person who's perpetrating the murders and that kind of thing, because I think it adds depth. You don't want your villain to be a cardboard character. You want him to feel real and to have something for your protagonist to go up against. Does that make sense?
Is fascinating. I've never heard that before, and it never occurred to me because I think I get distracted thinking from my own, selfishly stuck in my own thinking of that person is bad. They've killed people. They've taken the lives of other humans, or they've wronged this person, or hit them by a car, or whatever. And I don't think about that. Is fascinating. I'm gonna have to give that some more thought, because now that you say it, I'm having this major aha moment. Wow. Yeah. Alan would like to know how and why did you choose to write in the first person?
That's another really great question. In fact, there's a book that I'm toying with writing right now that I'm debating. Do I move over into third? First person was what I wrote my first novel in. It felt comfortable. It's what I wrote my second one in, and my third one. I think it does give a certain amount of opportunity for intimacy. And if you develop the secondary characters well, you can have some really productive moments where you see what what Corravan is thinking, but how it doesn't quite match up, for example, with Belinda or Styles or Vincent. So you see his sort of internal narrative, the story that he's telling himself about how the world works and how he fits into it and all those other kinds of things. And, and every so often somebody else will kind of pop in with no, you've got that wrong. And that's a productive moment, because, you know, as you're writing a book, at least what I've kind of found to be most useful is to map out there, you know, here's the plot arc, this is my mystery arc, and then here's my character arc. What aspect of my protagonist's, you know, sort of personal myth, to use a word that, to use a phrase that that I really like from a book by a professor at Northwestern that I read a couple years ago. But you know, we've all got a personal myth, right? That about who we are, how the world works, whether we trust people, whether, you know, like all this kind of stuff that is based on our early experiences and our and the tools that we had at that time to interpret our early experiences, right? So we get this narrative going, and sometimes it's not quite accurate to the world. And so sometimes, so what I kind of feel, you know, like Corravan has to do is he begins the book with certain elements of narrative, and by the end of the book, he has to tweak them a little bit in order to match up with his current experience. And part of it is because he is trying to do things his old way, and he keeps banging his head against the wall. It's not working. He is not making any progress on this case. And it's not until sort of toward the end of the book when he's fought with Vincent, he's fought with Stiles, he's fought with Belinda. But, you know, one of the things about Corravan, I mean, he grew up rough. I mean, he was an orphan, he turned to thieving, then he started working on the docks, which is not a, you know, a particularly nice, cultured place to work. And then he became a bare knuckles boxer, you know, to sort of, you know, add a little bit of extra money in his pocket kind of thing, before he had to leave Whitechapel. And that roughness taught him certain things, you know, like the most important traits are strength, an ability to make quick decisions, being good with your fists, being good with a knife, not depending on other people, not being a burden to other people. And you know, just being strong, you know, kind of. And one of the things, you know, about 3/4 of the way through the book, one of the things Belinda points out to him is, you love being a rescuer. And that's all well and good, you know, policemen, it's great. She says, but you got to think about the reason you're doing it. Part of the reason you're doing it is because you're a good person, and, you know, but part of it is so that you never have to face your own vulnerabilities. If you're always the rescuer, you know, you're not the weak one. You're not the one who needs help. And she says, and frankly, I think that you would be a better policeman if you developed a little bit of empathy for this person who you're trying to find, and this murderer that you're trying to find. So I, you know, so that's what I'm saying. I feel like, you know, Corravan kind of starts in one place, and he has some things to learn along the way. And as he learns them, he gets closer to unraveling the case. Those things kind of have to go together, I think. So
interesting, because I'm noticing that through this psychological evaluation of Corravan and also Belinda, there's a lot of in 1878 London, there's a lot of lessons that could serve all of us here, myself most definitely included, in 2021, almost 22. Empathy for what the other is feeling, compassion, self-analysis. What is my personal myth, and how does that match up with what others reflect to me and tell me I see in myself? And if I can cultivate the humility to listen and to notice the differentials, how can I grow into a better person? There's a lot of food for thought here, Dr. Karen. A lot of food for thought. Alan is saying, thank you for the answer. Yeah, this is a meaty conversation. Thanks for the hearts up on Facebook, you guys. Kathy, great question. Do you consider the narrator an unreliable narrator when it's first person, since it is that person's view alone? Ooh, Kathy, that's like, now we're going to a whole other level. Now we're getting meta. Let's talk about this.
This is a great question.
Yeah.
Because, you know, in some ways, yes, I do. I mean, Corravan is a reliable narrator in the sense that he is trying to be honest with the reader. He you know, that's a premise. I mean, he really is trying to be honest, but there are things he does not recognize about himself. Just like there are things we don't recognize about ourselves, our traits or our quirks, or, or even our beliefs, until they run into somebody else and they, and someone says, yeah, it doesn't sound quite right. So to some extent, they are always an unreliable narrator. It's their subjectivity, their baggage that they're bringing to it. And maybe that's part of why I find them interesting, why he continues to be interesting to me, because he still has more things that he has to sort of unpack and recognize about himself, and to recognize how those things shape how he polices, how he investigates a crime. What kinds of assumptions does he have that lead him in one direction or another, and maybe don't serve him all that well? So yeah, so that's a great question.
What a cool question, Kathy. I love that. I love that. And I'm loving this deep conversation. So any other questions, get them going in the comments. Meanwhile, I want to hop over to another review that I really loved. There are so many here. New York Journal of Books. Odden has created a page turner that is definitely hard to put down. Historical Novel Society, impossible to put down. Mystery and suspense, superbly written, fast-paced suspense. So I want to pause on these three, because what I notice is that all of them are talking about, from a craft perspective, how you write a book that people don't put down and don't finish, right? We've all had those where we're like, yeah, I'll finish it later. And then we just never pick it back up because it has failed to keep those pages flying. Now, all three of these talk about your ability to have mastered the opposite of that. You keep those pages flying. What do you think is the most important, from a craft perspective, of making that happen? How do you write something that is, quote, impossible to put down?
Well, there are a couple things. First of all, I use index cards. I lay them on. I have a hallway. I also have a rescue beagle who likes to come and like mess them up. But I lay them down. I literally, like, I have two layers. I have the top layer is the plot layer, and then this bottom one is the character layer. And I make sure that every single one has a certain amount of conflict and energy about it. And if I find one that's kind of like, oh yeah, that's not as interesting as the others, I find a way to pitch it. The second thing is I really try hard to, again, it's my beta readers. When I give the book to them, when I give a manuscript to them, I tell them, one of the number one things I want you to tell me is when you start getting bored. This is not an insult. This is the best information a writer can get. If you are getting bored, just put a B in the margin. And no joke, no, I'm serious. Like, and it's so funny because like I was talking to somebody about how can you have people read and critique your book, before it's published, and all this kind of thing. And I really hate having people, critique my manuscript and all. And I kind of feel like I am deeply and profoundly attached to the writing process. But as for the 300 words on a page on any given day, not at all. Like, I really don't. Like, they're going to change again tomorrow and the next day and the next day. I'm not attached to them. I'm attached to the process, but not attached to the words per se. So if somebody tells me these 2 pages are boring, I find my mind like, moving away, cross them out. I get rid of them. Try and condense it down, condense like the salient piece of information in those 2 pages into like one sentence, and drop it in and kick things out. And I don't usually have a problem with word count, because I usually turn in something that's too long. Like, gosh, my agent was kind of like, oh God, Karen, 120,000 words again. So what I've started doing is, I write the book and somehow it always turns into 120,000 words. And then I go back in and I slice out 20,000. And then I send it out to my agent. And it keeps it moving. It keeps it moving.
Now, Karen, when you request, put the B in the margin, which, by the way, I love that. Put a B in the margin, B for board. When and if you ever do get a B in the margin back, does it ever catch you by surprise? Like, what? That scene, you should be sweating through your shirt. Or are you kind of thinking to yourself, I wondered about that?
Yeah, usually I am. Usually I'm thinking, that was not one of the more exciting pieces. Yeah, I can tighten that up. I can tighten that one up. Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very
cool. And often, I mean, who knows, maybe it's because the people that I choose to be beta readers, but often I will get similar comments from 2 or 3 readers. So you kind of get a what do they call that? Like an agreement, I guess, kind of. So
interesting.
yeah.
Let me ask you, what is your favorite scene in this book to both have written and, if it's different, to read?
Oh, wow. It's funny because the scene that jumped into my head was actually from my first book, Lady in the Smoke. There's a trial scene that I kind of wrote from start to finish, and I basically never altered it, and it still makes me cry when I read it. But I'm trying to think if I have one. Yes, there is actually. There is a scene. I mean, probably the climactic scene, which happens on Blackfriars Bridge, is one of them. But another one is where Corravan is interviewing a maid. And she is telling him a story of her experience.
And and I know the scene you're talking about, what makes it so powerful for you? Are you talking about as a reader or a writer?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, when I was writing that scene, I remember feeling breathless. I remember feeling like my fists were kind of tight. Kind of like I felt myself clutching in my chair, as I was writing it. But yeah, there's a scene where where Rachel talks and tells Corravan her story, and he has to listen, and it is very hard for him to listen to her story. And that little scene was probably the most intense of all the scenes that I wrote. And also was one of the ones that came to me like the movie. I put Rachel there and I put Corravan here. They're sitting at a table, and I just let them go at it, and I just wrote down what they did.
I love that. Maria chiming in to say that scene with the maid was so painful, but so well done. Maria, thank you for that comment, and for letting us know that it resonated with you so much as well. Karen, I was wondering if you were going to say that something from the 2014 modern day case had resonated in some way, or it tied into that case in Alabama with the car, or I wasn't sure if you would, if it didn't, or I was curious to see where that would go too.
Yeah, I mean, that scene kind of does, because Rachel is wronged, and just the way the young woman in Alabama was wronged. Yeah. So I guess I had not made that connection until you just said that. But yes, they are linked. That is the core of the story. Yeah.
Because it's interesting how very much things have changed for women since 1878, drastically. I mean, in terms of rights, power, just a sense of self. I mean, just so much. And also how some things don't change. Any thoughts on that?
Well, part of the reason that I love to set my books in 1870s London is because there was a tremendous amount of change during that decade. And Queen Victoria was on the throne from 1837 to 1901. It's a long time. So that's why it's a really long time. And so that's why a lot of times historians break it up into early, middle, and high, late Victorian kind of, because it's really like 3 very different time periods, sort of loosely. But in 1870s is interesting, because in 1860s, there were several things that were happening simultaneously that led to the possibility of new laws in 1870s. One of these was in 1867. The new Reform Act extended the vote to another 1 million men. So it was not just landed gentry anymore. You've got people who are who are middle class, very definitely working middle class, who are voting. So concerns are changing. The number of newspapers went from something, I'm going to get the numbers wrong because I'm not a numbers person, that's my husband. But from something like, I think it's 50 newspapers to over 1,000 in the course of like 2 decades.
Wow.
Literacy rates were rising. And the reason we can tell is because on marriage licenses in the 1850s, people would do and not as many people were signing their names. By the 1870s, many more people were signing their names, like 75 to 80% of people were signing their names.
Wow.
So you've got newspapers circulating, people talking about, all kinds of issues, social issues, education, cruelty to children, married women's rights, all these things. And what ends up happening is in 1870s, you get just this blast of laws. For example, the Education Act, which made it mandatory for all children, boys and girls, to go to school from age 6 to 12.
Oh, wow.
In 1870, the Married Women's Property Act, for the first time, put a wedge into coverture. Do you know what coverture is?
No.
Okay, so coverture was the idea that a woman, when she married, she subsumed her identity into that of her husband. Practically speaking, it meant she could not own property. The children were not hers, they were her husband's. She could not inherit property. She could not, for example, begin a lawsuit without her husband doing it for her. She couldn't initiate a divorce unless she could prove that he was unfaithful and that he had either beaten her or deserted her for 4 years. So this is coverture, okay? So as you say, things have changed a lot for women. But in 1870, for the first time ever, this law made it possible for a woman who worked, like who earned a wage, she could keep it. And she didn't have to turn it over to her husband. I mean, it's a tiny little chink in the iceberg, but it's significant because it gave women more power over their pin money, as it were. It also meant that if he was being abusive, she had some options. And she could, for example, take her small baby and go somewhere else because she had some money. So, that's why 1870s is fascinating, because there's all this change happening. And particularly with respect to women, to the middle classes, literacy, education, I mean, all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
You know what's crazy though, Karen? I read a couple years ago that until 1977, in the United States of America, in the state of Connecticut, a woman could not open a bank account without a co-signer of her husband or her father. So this is what's so mind-blowing and so shocking that you think of those, 1878, I mean, my jaw is dropping as I hear these: women can't earn money, women can't keep money, their children belong to the husband, he has to cheat and abuse you for 4 long years. That's crazy. But then I think to myself, it's within my lifetime that women couldn't have a checking account unless her husband or father co-signed her. I mean, it's been a slow slog.
In some ways it really has. And one of the things in my book is that, there are some powerful women in the book. Belinda Gale is a novelist and a playwright, but she has her own money because her father put it in trust for her. It cannot be touched by anyone. And if she marries, this trust is hers. It can't be handed over. Legally, there were ways to actually put that protective covering around something, but of course only for sort of the upper middle classes. They knew how to do that. They had lawyers.
Whim, the father had to be like, let me protect her, let me, otherwise he might just not feel that way. That is crazy. I also loved that Mariah Fredericks, author of the Jane Prescott mystery series, said no one does Victorian England like Karen Odden. Fans of Anne Perry and Charles Finch will welcome Inspector Michael Corravan. I absolutely loved that review. High praise. Let's talk about, because I'm hearing that your research is intense and thorough to know these laws, to look at, we're talking about voting laws, to look at the, at the coverture, to look at all of these things. So you hold a PhD, clearly you know a thing or two about research. So give us a sneak peek into that back room that you must have spent a lot of time in digging through dusty old files.
I actually did for my dissertation. I wrote it on Victorian railway disasters, and I was interested in looking at the history of what we now call trauma or PTSD, because a lot of people consider the beginning of it as sort of with shell shock. in World War I that you know that phrase. It's like, the soldiers were coming back. Actually, it was in Downton Abbey too, with all kinds of strange injuries that you couldn't really figure out their cause. But if you go back to the 1890s, Sigmund Freud and Joseph Breuer were working with hysterical women who had been traumatized and who had many of the same symptoms that spread across their whole entire body and seemed to have no clear cause. And then you go back even further in the 1860s, and you had these victims of railway disasters. Same thing was happening. And for example, Charles Dickens was in a railway crash in Staplehurst in Kent, and his whole entire carriage tipped over on its side, and he crawled out. He was actually traveling with his mistress, Ellen Ternan, a young, pretty actress, and her mother. Yes, his wife was at home with the 10 children, as one does. And so he crawls out, and he happened to have like brandy or something with him, I think. And he's walking around ministering to people and helping people, and and all. And then London sent an express train, and he hops on it and goes back to London, goes home, and then the next day he wakes up and he's distraught. He has like ringing in his ears. His hand is shaking so badly he can't sign his name. He begins to have nightmares that are so terrible he won't go to bed. And he ended up dying 5 years to the day afterwards.
Oh, wow.
And and his son said in his memoirs, my father never got over that railway accident. And, so I was interested in hunting that down. And then one of the things that NYU, where I did my PhD, they were super generous. They let me spend 6 weeks in London with a program, and I just spent 6 weeks in the British Library just reading and uncovering and also it was not just what I was learning about the railways, it was also what I was learning about how to do good research, how to chase things down. And this is before the internet was quite as big as it is now. I mean, now you can kind of go into a rabbit hole. I mean, some of my friends say, oh yeah, I get started researching, I can spend 6 hours just kind of like trailing one thing after another, and you have to be a little careful about that. But I do love the research process, and I do believe in going to primary sources. I feel very comfortable reading academic books. That's what I did for a long time. So, a book, there's one book that I absolutely love. It's called The Rise of the Policeman. It's by Haya Speyer-Makov, M-A-K-O-V, I think is his last name. And it charts the development from the Bow Street runners and the early thief takers of the 18th century and stuff, all the way up through like 1901. And so you can watch this trajectory. And she's also, of course, got a fabulous bibliography. So then if you want to read more, you can go to the bibliography and, hunt down some more sources and more primary things that you can read. So I really like to do that. And I've been lucky in being able to go to London a few times, in addition to that 6 weeks. When I was researching Dangerous Duet, I went to, which is about a young woman who wants to earn money to go to the Royal Academy of Music, kind of like Fanny Dickens in the 1820s. But where Fanny had to leave because she ran out of money and couldn't earn tuition, my heroine in the 1870s dresses up as a man and plays in a music hall for money. There were about like 200 or 300 music halls in London by that point, and they all needed pianists because you needed interlude music between the acts and all that kind of thing. And so I was lucky. I went to the Royal Academy of Music, walked in the door, and they have a little museum there. So I learned all kinds of really great information about music, and I even saw there's a class roster with Fanny Dickens in it, which is cool. I know. And so cool. All this information about music halls. And then the woman at the librarian who was kind of at the museum, she said, there is a music hall from Victorian England still standing. It's called Wilton's. It's in Grace's Lane in Whitechapel. So I trotted right on over there, and I got to see that too.
Very cool. Yeah. Very cool. Andrea is saying she really enjoyed this book. Andrea, great to have you as always. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. She says, I hope there is another one in the works. Karen, is there?
There is, yes. I got a 2-book deal with Crooked Lane. So the second book is the one that I'm working on right now. I'll do a reveal on the title. It's called Under the Veiled Moon.
Ooh.
And it is about, in 1878, there was a pleasure steamer called the Princess Alice. And she was one of 4 pleasure steamers that would leave from London Bridge, right, the Swan Pier, right near London Bridge, go all the way down to Sheerness at the sea, and then turn around and come back. And for 2 shillings, you could hop on and then hop off and get on one of the sister ships and, kind of do this all day long, stop off, have a picnic, hop back on, go down and see a concert, whatever. Anyway, so, but the evening of September 3rd, 1878, it's coming back up the Thames, and a coal ship rams it. The boat breaks into 3 pieces and throws 600 people into the water, and 500 of them die.
Oh my God!
Within minutes.
Swim, and especially
they
in
can't
heavy
swim.
Dresses.
Exactly. Most of them don't know how to swim. That's considered a lower class activity anyway. But not to mention, you don't know who's on the boat.
Right.
There's no manifest. It's not like the Titanic where you can look up and see see everybody on it. You don't know who's on the boat. So it created all kinds of havoc and kind of craziness. And anyway, so that was the starting point for this next book.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you for doing the title reveal here. We always like to reveal something, and that is a juicy tidbit. Thank you so much. I see another comment coming in from Naveen. She is saying, this is a comment and not a question. I took a friend along to a book signing by Karen at Poison Pen's bookstore in Scottsdale. A few days later, she was at my house. She loved the book so much, she asked to borrow the rest of Karen's books that sit prominently on my bookshelves. I wanted to say, buy your own copies, but I was too right. Oh my gosh. And I mean, this is a fabulous story. I love it. And if I may be so bold, I'm going to plop the link for your friend / everyone else in this event and who's going to watch it later to grab their own copy of the book, because everyone deserves to have their own copy of Down a Dark River. So here is the link right now, heading into the comments. And to Naveen's excellent point, you need the backlist as well. So I'm going to provide a link to all of Karen's backlist. It's the holiday season, folks. You know what that means? You're doing a lot for others. Am I right? You're cooking, you're hosting, you're maybe traveling, you're thinking about everyone else and everything else. But what about you, friends? What about you, mystery and thriller lovers? It's time to treat yourself. So grab Down a Dark River. Here is the link. And then go ahead and grab anything that snags your interest from Karen's backlist, because here's your chance to get yourself some, that week between Christmas and New Year's where you're just sitting around, you got nothing to do. You can read these books and treat yourself. Yay. And support a woman-owned bookstore, because guess what women can do now? Own businesses. Yay. And we have to vote with our dollars. So grab yourself, treat yourself, shop, and support women-owned businesses. Here's the link. Well, y'all, it looks like we are out of time, but I want to thank you all so much for joining me tonight, for chatting with us, for all of your great questions and comments and stories and thoughts. This has been such a fascinating and fabulous conversation. I have learned so much tonight, and I bet you all did too. So follow Karen on social media. I'm plopping the link to her Twitter in right here. And if you're not already a member of the Mystery and Thriller Mavens Facebook group, free and open to all, we continue the conversation over there. So we chat about our latest reads. We chat about the authors. I take requests for authors. You can submit questions in advance if you can't make it live. A lot of people watch later, no problem. So hop on over, join us. It's fun and fabulous. And if you like mysteries and thrillers, we're your people. We're over there. Karen, thank you so much for joining us. This has been fun, fabulous, funny, informative, entertaining, all of things. What a perfect person to wrap up an incredible year. You're our last author of the year. Naveen is saying, this was so great. Thank you so much. Naveen, thank you so much for joining us. I hope I'm saying your name right. I always want to get people's names exactly right. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing that story. That was so fabulous. I loved it. And Karen, you have been just so perfect to cap off this incredible year, because I've learned so much, and I love that. So thank you for joining us, and come back when book number 2, Under a Veiled Moon, is out.
I will. Thank you so much. This has been really fun.
Yay. All right, everybody. I am off next Monday for Christmas week. I will see you in 2022. I'll see you next year. How weird is that to say? I'll see you in 2022 for every Monday for hashtag Mystery Mondays, because Mondays can be murder. Good night. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.